going. Okay. Okay, well, I do want to throw out some more ideas about this stuff. I also think this whole issue with diversion, where you are smack in the middle, and you can put in the place of, you got to make sure that that patient's not trying to scam you and into that. I think the most courageous people working in the field of pain management are the people who are doing pain management with people who have been addicted to illegal drugs. I think those are the most courageous people. And of course I know that some of the people who get into that are people who are a little quirky. You got to be a little quirky to be drawn to that, and therefore they're more vulnerable to having a cop to go after them. But the fact of the matter is, because you become addicted to drugs doesn't mean that you don't suffer pain. Oftentimes the reason you got addicted to those drugs in the first place is because you were self-medicating in one way or another. Let's face it. So accepting that people have to be something. Maybe that'll help. But dealing with anybody who comes to the door, I also think that this whole diversion issue, yes, it's a real issue, but I think it's so grossly overstated, right? Why? Because there's the internet. I mean, you can get most of these drugs anyway. And these drugs are so widely available that putting you in the place of trying to play the gatekeeper there and trying to suss out the intentions and motivations and trying to be concerned about giving too much, why? I mean, I actually think that our whole law enforcement system suffers from another disorder of its own sort. I call it diversion obsessive disorder. DOD, right? Because it's overstated. Your role as gatekeepers is misplaced. It seems that your role should be first, second, and third about dealing with your patient and doing everything you can to ensure that their pain is being managed. And that those other roles should not be a major part of your preoccupation. I also, quite frankly, want to know, what the hell is the DEA doing in charge of scheduling? It's the Drug Enforcement Administration. It's cops. Why isn't the Institute of Medicine in charge of that? Why is the National Institute of Health and Disease Control in charge of that? Why is the DEA in charge of that? And who is challenging that basic idea about why cops should? I mean, when you look at something that marijuana is still in Schedule 1, after all these decades, given its relatively low risk and given the evidence, it's about politics and not something else. Right? There is no legitimate basis for that. In fact, I want to just push you, and this is where I'm talking, because most of my work is on the incremental work. It's working in state legislatures for treatment instead of incarceration. It's about medical marijuana, needle change to stop AIDS. It's reducing the harsh criminal sentencing. It's about overdose prevention, what have you. Right? But there's a broader vision here about accepting the reality of drugs. It's about acknowledging that there has never been a drug-free society in human history. Except maybe the Eskimos, because they couldn't grow anything. But I mean, apart from that, and that there's never going to be a drug-free society, right? That our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren live in a world that a far greater diversity of drugs. We're going to have Prozac Generation 8, and Ecstasy Generation 5, and Viagra Generation 21. And legal combinations, brain science is going to develop. There's going to be underground chemists and major pharmaceutical company chemists doing more and more and more things. The odds are that the opioids and cocaine and cannabis are going to hang around because they've been around for thousands of years, just like alcohol, and they're going to keep being around as well in various forms. Maybe the consumption of cannabis in the form of a joint will diminish as vaporizing devices become more smaller and easy to use and what have you. Maybe all that will change. But ultimately, I think that our best protection against the misuse of these substances in our society is not going to be by bulking up the law enforcement establishment more and more, getting more and more muscular and powerful and intimidating, and our prisons getting fuller and fuller and fuller. I actually think the greatest protection is going to be by the empowerment of the consumer and by the education of the consumer. I think, look, right now, opioid overdoses hit a new high last year. Overdose fatality, what are called overdoses somewhat inappropriately, the drug combinations involving opioids, is now the #2 leading cause of accidental death by injury in America after auto accidents, the number 2 leading cause. You guys are there. I mean, there's 25,000, 30,000 people a year. And some of this is out of the drugs that you're prescribing, some is getting diverted, some is black market, some is entirely black market, some is heroin. But I believe that in many states now, overdoses involving pharmaceutical opioids are greater than overdose fatalities involving illegal heroin. Right? You and I know that, like with methadone, it's cheap, it's remarkably effective, but if you don't use it right, it's a problem. People die that way. Right? You and I know that OxyContin can be a wonderful, fantastic pain drug, and that, what happened with people breaking and all this sort of, maybe Purdue Pharma promoted it too heavily and people are breaking it up, but we know is that a powerful medication, effective medication, is being underutilized because of the fears over here. Right? Now, I want you to imagine a different world that somehow jumps back 100 years but jumps forward. Imagine if your role, your power to prescribe, was no longer the power of the gatekeeper, but simply the power of the advisor. Imagine if your role when people came to you and said, "Doctor, I need help, I need advice in managing me," and you would thereby recommend which medications to use. But you would not be the determiner of whether or not they could or would not get it. And you would give them a recommendation form for whatever drugs were appropriate or whatever, and then they would go to a pharmacy. And before the pharmacist could hand them that drug, right, it wouldn't be, in a little orange bottle with, do not drink and whatever, do not drive and take these things. Before anybody could get their medication, a little screen would pop up on the pharmacist's table right there with 10 questions about drug combinations, about what to do if you don't, if something happens, et cetera, et cetera. 10 basic safety questions, like a driver's license thing or something. Right? So and the person, before the pharmacist could give it to the individual, the consumer, they would have to get all 10 questions right. Now, they could take the test as many times as they want until they got it right. But you would effectively be force-feeding consumer education. Right? You would be force-feeding consumer education. This notion of treating every patient in America, no matter their age or wisdom, as an infant, as a child, this paternalistic approach to these drugs, this assumption that the ordinary human beings cannot be trusted with these powerful things, that ultimately you have to do it, and if you don't do it right, you're going to get in trouble. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think also the issue here, we're now very involved in trying to prevent these overdose fatalities among people using drugs in the street. Well, there is an antidote, naloxone. How many of you routinely give a prescription for naloxone the same time you give a prescription for pain medication? One? Anybody else? Let me ask you, why not? Why isn't any, I know I've been through a powerful pain experience. I know what you start to do when that pain won't go away and you're going crazy, right? Why aren't you administering the naloxone at the same time? Not only giving it, why aren't you teaching the family members how to use it at the same time? We're also promoting Good Samaritan 911 laws to say that, if somebody overdoses, call the cops right away to prevent a heart attack. Don't wait, and the cops won't bust you because the Good Samaritan 911 says the police will not arrest. But I want to finish by saying this. Beneath all of this, I threw out a bunch of ideas, right, about your role as gatekeepers, about this broader drug war, about asking and appealing to you to sort of stand up in a new way about this and to think about your own practice. But the bottom line is, I think that there is a core principle behind all of what I'm talking about. And it's a core principle I think pervades the work you do and the broader way we deal with drugs in our society. And it's this. I believe that nobody deserves to be punished simply for what we put in our bodies, acts and harm to others. That nobody deserves to be punished for what you put in your body, acts and harm to others. Get behind the wrong car, that's something else. But for what I put in here, I have to remain sovereign over this mind and body, as do every one of us in a free society. I think that core principle and building our public health protections and our public health notions and public health around that notion is absolutely essential to moving into a world where drugs are going to be ever more diverse, ever more available, and where we cannot and where we must not rely on the role of criminal justice to control this phenomenon. That we're ultimately, it's about dealing with drugs in our society in ways based upon science, compassion, health, and human rights. Thank you.